A few years back, just as school was ending for the summer, it was my last day of 8th grade. It felt exactly like you'd picture the final day of middle school, a mix of excitement and sad goodbyes. Everyone was running around, scribbling signatures and funny messages in each other's yearbooks. My middle school was huge, easily housing over 1,000 students. To keep things from getting too crazy, teachers gathered our yearbooks and passed them between classrooms. This made sure everyone who wanted to could sign. But you can probably see the problem this created. Anyone could write anything they wanted in anyone else's book. Teachers tried their best to stop things from going too far, but I knew a few kids who wrote mean things to people they didn't like. When I finally got my yearbook back at the end of the day, I quickly flipped through the pages, laughing at all the silly notes from my friends. But as I looked closer, something unusual caught my eye. Right below the picture of someone I'd never seen before was a signature. His name was Samuel Robinson III, a name I will never forget. His message was short, simple, and honestly a little creepy. It read, "Hags, I'll be seeing you again." I stared at the page, completely confused. I had never even spoken a single word to this Samuel kid, but there was nothing I could do about it now. The school year was over, so I wouldn't see him even if I tried. I just figured it was some weird kid being weird. Or maybe an honest mistake. Either way, I stopped thinking about it. A few hours passed, and soon I was at home, hosting a sleepover in my basement with my best friends Kevin, David, and Kieran. The four of us ate Doritos and played video games all night. My parents' room was 3 floors above us, so we didn't worry much about being too loud. We were messing around on my dad's exercise machine, sometime just before 2 in the morning, when we heard a sharp knock at the storm door. The sound instantly silenced us. Who in the world would knock on the storm door? It had to be someone who either didn't want to wake my parents, or knew we were down there, or both. It made no sense. The person kept knocking in the same steady rhythm. I could tell Kieran was about to speak, and I couldn't stop him. In a loud, confident voice, he asked who was there. I wanted to hit him. He had just told whoever was outside that we were definitely in the basement. My basement doesn't have any windows that face outside, so it was unlikely they knew we were there. But now they did. After a long pause and no more knocking, a muffled voice replied. He said, "Come around to the back door." His voice was high-pitched and sounded truly cheerful, like one of our friends trying to join the sleepover. It was definitely a teenager's voice, too, and it didn't sound fake or forced. I was pretty scared. I can't lie. My friends, though, seemed completely calm, as if they found it exciting that some random kid was outside my house. They insisted I at least go check it out. Even though I really didn't want to, they talked me into it. We crept upstairs, careful not to make too much noise. I walked towards the back door slowly, trying to ignore my heart pounding in my chest. Through the narrow glass beside the door, I saw a shadowy shape standing under the dim light. I got a little closer, and his face came into view. My jaw nearly dropped when I realized who it was. It was him. It was that kid, Samuel Robinson III, who had signed my yearbook. My friends moved to open the door. Goodness knows why, but I stopped them, saying I knew who it was. I quickly told them what had happened, and that changed their mood a bit. Remember, Sam was still standing outside while we talked, and he could clearly see us inside. He must have noticed how freaked out I was, because he started waving towards the side of the house, as if he wanted me to go to the window. You might wonder why none of us were taking this more seriously. I honestly think it was because it wasn't some older strange man bothering us. It was just a kid from our own school. Still, I wasn't opening the door for him. Instead, I went to my kitchen window and opened it just a tiny crack. My friends followed me and stood a little to the side. He walked over to the window, and I asked him what he wanted, telling him I recognized him from my yearbook. He said, "Oh, so you got my message?" and introduced himself as Sam. Then he went on to say he always watched me from far away, and that we could have been good friends. I agreed with him, just so I wouldn't upset him. But there was absolutely no way I would ever be friends with this kid under any circumstances. I didn't want to push him right away, but I had to know, so I asked him how he knew where I lived. He didn't answer, and I didn't know what to say next. Before I could calm the situation down, David called him a creepy stalker and told him to get lost. Sam's smile vanished. He tilted his head as if he didn't understand what David had said. Then, just as fast, his face twisted into something I can only describe as pure hatred. He went from being calm and almost friendly to aggressive and furious. He started screaming things at me, how he hated my friends and thought we should all die, how my ex hated me, and other random private things he had no business knowing. He reached for the window and tried to force it open, but I slammed it shut and locked it. He began snarling at the window and banging on it like an animal. I'm telling you, he was 2 seconds from shattering. We must have made quite a racket, because my parents came rushing down the stairs, demanding to know why we had woken them up. That's when Sam ran away. I told my parents what happened as fast as I could, and my dad rushed outside in his underwear. He came back a few minutes later, saying he had no idea where the kid went. I'm not sure why, but my parents didn't call the police. They just told us to go back to sleep, and said they'd deal with the school the next morning, giving the kid the benefit of the doubt. The next morning, they contacted the school. That's when we found out the disturbing truth. Sam had been expelled a few weeks before the year ended, and he shouldn't have been at the school on the last day at all. Apparently, the yearbooks were printed before his expulsion, which explained why his picture was still in it. That meant he had somehow snuck into the school just to write me that message, which freaked me out beyond belief. Even though we worked with the school to find out more, nobody could track Sam down. It was like he and his parents didn't even exist. The whole thing was a pretty big deal, but the school did what they could to keep it quiet. To this day, I still have no idea how he knew where I lived. That's what scares me the most. The common guess is that he was a mentally troubled young boy who took a strange liking to me for some unknown reason, and then stalked me for who knows how long. My parents were worried for weeks. It's something we don't talk about anymore because it's just too uncomfortable. But living in that same house has never felt the same ever since. My friend Garrett is a little wild, and when I say a little, I mean a lot. He's one of those guys who brags about how tough and aggressive he is, like it's something to be proud of. He's always getting into fights, can't keep his mouth shut, and spends more time at the gym than anywhere else, including his own home. There are actually 5 stories about him I could tell, but the scariest one by far is the one you're about to hear. It also directly involves me, and I feel much more comfortable telling my own story rather than someone else's. This happened a couple of weeks ago, which also happened to be the last day of senior year. In May, the graduation ceremony wasn't for a few more days, so even though classes were done, we still had to stick around. It's a tradition for all graduating seniors to get completely drunk on the last day of classes, so that's exactly what we did. There's a huge clock tower in the middle of campus, where all the seniors gather to drink, which is exactly where we were at 10 p.m. There were over 1,000 people crammed into that one courtyard. It was a bit sad for me at least, but I think everyone was relieved to have finished finals, which are pretty tough at my school. There are a few other senior traditions I could tell you about, but I'll try to keep things short. There were 6 of us. It was me, CTRN, and of course Garrett. I don't think the rest of my friends would be comfortable with their full names being shared, so I'm just using their first initial. I should also quickly mention that we lived off campus, meaning we had to walk through the city to get home. There are quite a few homeless people in that city, so it's not unusual to see some of them late at night. Anyway, we were heading back home from the clock tower when Garrett did something typical of Garrett. Well, it wasn't really his fault at first, but that's beside the point. As we were crossing the street, some random homeless guy ran up to our group and started acting erratically. Usually the homeless people around here keep to themselves, since they're often on drugs and don't notice their surroundings. But this guy clearly wanted to interact. He was just standing in the middle of the crosswalk, yelling things at us like he was a bridge troll guarding the other side of the street. We laughed a little and started walking in a wide circle around him, as we didn't want to make him angry or provoke him. Well, everyone but Garrett. Instead of ignoring him, Garrett started yelling back at the guy, telling him to get out of the street and stop bothering strangers. The agitated man didn't like that and took a few aggressive steps toward Garrett. That's when the rest of us stepped in to stop a fight from happening. We must have scared the man because he stopped moving forward and went back to just yelling. I pulled Garrett out of the street, trying to get him to behave, but he pushed my hand away. Before any of us could do anything, he charged full speed at the agitated man and screamed something crazy. The man started running away, which made Garrett stop charging and start laughing. I know it's bad, but the scene was genuinely funny. As messed up as it was like running full speed into a flock of birds and watching them scatter. We started walking toward our house after that, but after a few minutes, we realized the man was following us. When he caught us looking back at him, he started yelling things about how we had made a huge mistake and how he was gonna call a niche, whatever that meant. We started yelling insults back at him, hoping he'd get scared and leave. But I'm pretty sure we only made his tantrum worse. Look, I'm not proud of everything that happened that night, but we were about to graduate from a very good university and had been celebrating all night with alcohol, so we weren't thinking clearly enough to properly understand the situation. About a block away from our house, we realized the guy was still following, though a little further back. I told the others I didn't feel comfortable leading him to our house, and the other guys agreed. So naturally, Garrett took off toward the homeless guy before the group could decide what to do. He again started sprinting at the guy, who once again fled in the opposite direction. Garrett turned and jogged back toward us, and we all jogged up the street. We thought that was the end of it. We made it back to our house, pretty confident we hadn't been followed that time. I'm not even gonna get into what we did back at the house. Let's just say it was a level of craziness I won't be experiencing again anytime soon. I can't even tell you what time it was. I was stumbling out of the front door to pick up my food delivery when I noticed something strange. The side gate that led into our backyard was wide open. It was especially weird because we used a small piece of string to keep it shut. So the gate being open meant that someone had deliberately untied it. I immediately made the connection. It was probably that guy from earlier. I was smart enough to figure that out, but I guess I wasn't smart enough to react properly. The sensible thing would have been to tell my friends, but my drunken self decided to investigate. I put the food delivery on the porch and went around the house, trying my best to walk straight. I turned the corner into the backyard, and before I could even see, I felt a rope around my throat. I thrashed wildly, but it was no use. Someone was choking me from behind, and there was nothing I could do. I felt the rope's rough edges digging into my throat as he pulled it tighter with all his strength. I truly thought I was going to die. With all my might, I kicked my legs backward, and he lost his balance. The two of us hit the ground, and I could breathe again, but he was still on top of me. In a fit of anger, he clawed at my face, and I could feel blood running down my cheek. I threw him off me, and he got to his feet before running out of sight. I'll try and keep things short from here on. I ended up having to go to the hospital that night. The cuts weren't deep, but I needed a bunch of shots to protect me against any diseases the guy might have had. The police were not very helpful, and since I was moving out a week later, there wasn't much I could do either. The worst part about the whole thing was that I had visible cuts in all my graduation photos. Garrett felt so bad he ended up taking me to get a gift, but I never held anything against him. I just hope he's learned his lesson about not bothering people who have nothing to lose. When I was in 7th grade, there was this kid named Sven in my homeroom. To put it mildly, he was a bit odd. He was one of those kids who didn't talk to anyone else, even though people often tried to include him. I didn't have all my classes with him, but from what I recall, he would always sit in the same spot in every room, the back corner opposite the door. Without fail, he'd show up to school in the exact same outfit every day. Cargo shorts and a very large burgundy hoodie. He obviously didn't speak much, but when he did have to answer a question or read a passage, he had a really deep voice that many other kids made fun of him for. I don't remember him having any friends at all, which made sense. This one time, my friend Tyler caught him cutting up worms during recess, which I'm pretty sure he ended up getting punished for. Speaking of recess, Sven would spend the entire period by himself next to the fence that bordered the woods. He never played any games or did anything even slightly kid-like. He'd just stand next to that fence doing who knows what. Some of my friends claim to have seen him talking to someone on the other side, but I've personally never seen that, so I won't spread possible rumors. I'm trying to think of other things about him worth mentioning. He had several small habits and other strange behaviors typical of any weird middle schooler, but none are important to the story I'm gonna tell. This happened on the very last day of school. I went to a pretty big middle school with lots of kids per grade, meaning there were a ton of classes with students from the same year happening all the time. Because of that, there was a last day of school tradition, where students from the same year would sneak into and sit in random classrooms to try and mess with the teachers. I'm pretty sure the teachers knew about this, and played along to entertain the kids, but that's neither here nor there. I don't remember the exact time this happened, but I do remember I was in one of the few classes I shared with Sven. Everything was exactly as it had been all day. The entire class was mixed up with random students, who were supposed to be elsewhere. I was kind of a stickler for rules growing up. That's just how I was raised, so I never joined in any of the silly antics. My friends all did though, so I was often alone in all of my classes, since they went to other rooms together. This was one of those times. All my friends had left the room, and the only kid I knew even a little by chance was Sven. Sven was acting stranger than usual that day. That's something I remember clearly. I can't fully recall what we were learning or doing in class, but I do remember that Sven was tapping his foot quite loudly, something he never did. He was also constantly looking around the room, as if searching for someone or trying to keep track of someone. I don't think he was watching me, but I couldn't be sure. The other thing I remember was that there were a lot more kids in the class I didn't recognize. Sure, one or two wasn't anything unusual since everything was swapped around, but the chances that there were so many students I had never even seen before were very low. At some point, the teacher, I'm pretty sure her name was Miss Bell, told us to get into groups of 3 or 4 to work on some kind of end-of-year reflection paper. Nothing serious. Most kids just used it as an excuse to talk and goof off. At one point, Miss Bell walked over to her desk, picked up the classroom phone, and turned her back to us. A few minutes later, another teacher showed up, I think from the room next door. They stepped just outside the classroom door and started whispering. It wasn't a long talk, maybe half a minute, but something about it felt off, like they were trying not to make a scene. I could tell something was up. Miss Bell looked nervous. That's honestly the best way I can describe her mood. After they finished talking, Miss Bell and the other teacher came back into the room. They didn't say anything to the class. They just walked over to a few specific kids and knelt down beside their desk. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but whatever it was quiet. Clearly like they didn't want the rest of us to notice. A minute later, those same kids got up and followed the teachers into the hallway. No one really reacted. I felt like I was the only one who even noticed what was happening. Miss Bell came back a few minutes later, alone this time. She didn't say anything about the kids who left. She just sat back down at her desk and started shuffling papers as if nothing had happened. But right after she did, the fire alarm went off. Miss Bell didn't really react like she knew it was going to happen. She told us to line up and head outside, and we joined the rest of the school out by the field behind the building. As usual, everyone was grouped by homeroom, so I ended up standing with a bunch of familiar faces again. But while we were all standing there, I looked back at the school for no reason, just out of habit, I guess, and I could have sworn I saw something move in one of the second-story windows. It was quick, and maybe it was just a reflection or a shadow or something, but it felt wrong. The school was supposed to be completely empty. I kept it to myself, but I was really scared when it came to going back inside the building. We never did go back inside though. Before the alarm even stopped ringing, we started hearing sirens. A few minutes later, police cars started pulling into the lot. Not just one or two, but a whole line of them. They didn't waste time either. Officers jumped out and rushed straight into the building. No one explained anything. Teachers just told us to stay calm and wait. After a while, someone came around and said school was being let out early. No buses. We had to call our parents. We were never told what actually happened. My parents ended up telling me what happened, or at least what the school had told them. They told me that a bunch of kids who didn't even go to our school had somehow gotten in. A rumor went around that they were planning to set the place on fire. Apparently, Miss Bell had discovered some very alarming tools in one of the kids' backpacks, and the school tried flushing everyone out with the fire drill. The details are still a bit unclear, so I'm hoping I'm explaining everything properly. The part that really stuck with me was what my mom said at the end, that the kids had been let in by Sven through the side fence during recess. The whole thing was so strange. It's still difficult to fully understand even now. I never saw even a